This morning we are going to start, or I am going to start teaching on the next book in the Bible. But before I begin with that, I just want to bring a few reasons why I'm going to move on to the New Testament, and why I started with the Old Testament. Right? Lots of Christians they don't really read well. I would say kind of the majority of Christians don't really read the whole Bible. Even pastors, missionaries, unluckily. So it's not just lay people, lay Christians, or just ordinary church members. Right. The other thing is, and even those who do read, more often than not, they read kind of the New Testament. As well, understand me here correctly, even when they translate the Bible into a new language, like the Wycliffe Bible Society, etc. I'm not bashing the work here now. I'm just stating this, and that's a fact. Is that they will start with the New Testament, and the Old Testament in that language will take kind of forever or sometimes it will take a lot longer. I know they kind of, and I mean I know it is a very difficult task. I know translating the whole Bible is a super difficult task, and so you kind of want to start with what you feel is the important part, but unluckily the repercussions of that is that people, Christians in general, start treating, and people in these countries where they get the Bible or only the New Testament in their language, they start treating the Old Testament as if it's kind of unnecessary. It's kind of just a long, wasteful read leading nowhere. And so even when then they do translate the Old Testament into their language, they're so used to already just reading the New Testament that they kind of never read the Old Testament. And then they totally miss out on the beauty of God's Word, which is for me very sad. I've used this example in the past and I've used it again. It's like you don't start reading a book from the last 20 pages of a 100-page book, right? Because yes, you might see, okay, who is the guilty party, or how is the story going to end? But you don't really get a glimpse of the beauty of the whole story. It's kind of disjointed. And yes, I know the Bible is not the ordinary book, 66 books, but that does not take away from the fact that God wrote or gave a book with 66 books in such a way and in such an order, right? So I would advise people and even Wycliffe maybe to think of when they do translate the New, that they will keep at least that part that the others still can, that's not in the language, but the language that the people can understand, that they would keep on teaching that as well and keep on referring back to that part, so that people will get a whole better picture of the whole story and not just part of the story. So for that reason I started with the Old Testament, not only because it's Genesis, in the beginning God created, right? Because it's such a fundamental part of our faith. But I will, after a New Testament book, go back to an Old Testament book and go back and forth between the books, so as to always show the importance of the Old as well. Okay, so again, for that reason I started with the Old Testament, to show that the Old Testament is actually an integral part of the whole story, and not just an addendum, or in this case a prelude to the real story. Right, that is the first. The second thing why then now I'm going to move over to the New Testament is to show again that connections between the Old and the New. And the book I chose to teach on, for the next book, is very much connected to, like all the New Testament books, to the Old Testament and to a correct understanding of the Old Testament. Right. The other thing I just want to as well speak about why is that we think Christ only appeared, right? There's this other opinion that the God of the Old Testament is just this evil God, and the God of the New Testament is just this good God, this hippie, long-haired, blue-eyed kind of Jesus, right, of the New Testament, and that evil, warmongering God of the Old Testament who says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I already explained to you, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is grace. Look at just what's happening today there in the Middle East, when one side kills 1,000, which is evil, and then the other side goes and kills 50,000. Now, if it was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, it would have been 1,000 on both sides, or 1,200 plus minus on both sides. It's not. I know they justify themselves, and this is not now a political thing. I'm just saying, I'm trying to just lift out the fact that an eye for an eye, that God told the Israelites, is actually grace, right? So and actually I plan to preach tomorrow on from the 4th chapter of Jonah, concerning that God in the Old Testament why Jonah didn't want to go to the people of Nineveh, because he knew God's this long-suffering God, and he's a forgiving God, right? That's the God of the Old Testament. So bringing this whole disjointed idea of the God of the old and is this evil God, and the God of the new is this Santa Claus kind of idea, right? Therefore as well, it's another reason why I'm teaching old, new, because it's the same God, it's not different gods. The last thing I want to touch on, just why, is the question of, so then other people say, but no, Jesus is nowhere. This is a sudden appearance of Jesus there in the New Testament, as if it was never planned, as if this thing was not preordained by God. Okay. Now here again there are two camps, or actually three camps, I would say. Right, there's the two extremes. Right, there's one extreme which finds Jesus in every chapter and every verse in the Old Testament. Okay, well, just a palm tree leaf falling off, blown off here by the wind. Right. So they believe that like in every chapter, in maybe not every verse, but in every chapter in the Old Testament, you kind of need to find Jesus. He's like absolutely everywhere. Now, in a certain sense, yes, he is absolutely everywhere. Then there's the others who are like, oh no, Jesus nowhere there. How could you? This can't be Jesus. That can't be Jesus. Right? He's just like nowhere, because you all of a sudden it can't be, because especially in the liberal scholars. Because that would be prophetic, prophecies don't exist, so, he's not there. You can't find him anywhere, and anywhere they find, it's not speaking about Jesus, because the people there would have had no idea, they didn't see Jesus yet, so had absolutely no idea of who Jesus is, kind of, right? So yeah, these are the two extremes. The one group can be very conservative, I think sometimes too conservative, another group is way too liberal. By now I think you know that I'm a more conservative person, right? But I think as well that one needs to be fully open and not just because this is what you are and therefore no. The word needs to speak for itself and what it is.